So I've been requested to check out Hakim's argument on the economic calculation problem. This is a problem, of course, that is grossly misunderstood.
Now this is something that really is a non-issue. Most people that invoke the ECP know very little of the details of the nearly century-long now discussion revolving around it.
So you can hear from his narcissism there that he's very arrogant, but across every single socialist regime you've seen the misallocation of valuable scarce resources into producing things that the market did not demand. It's what you call the misallocation of taking a scarce natural resource and allocating it into the wrong parts of the market. And of course he pretends that this is a non-issue.
They just read some libertarian Reddit post or something that told them it somehow destroys socialism.
Again, the arrogance. And yes, it actually does destroy socialism. You can see that even throughout every socialist economy you've seen. Never mind the full-blown socialist economies like the Soviet Union was faced with the surplus waste and shortage problems, etc. You've seen it within that of, things like the NHS, even in mixed economies.
When all it does is show the limited creativity of those that defend capitalism.
Yeah, the narcissistic personality disorder just shows the limited creativity. Yeah, let's just ignore recorded history. Let's ignore every single country that proved that it fails every single time it tries to control prices above or below market value and leads to exactly what the Soviet Union was faced with. As Thomas Sowell in his book Basic Economics goes on to mention about the two Soviet Union economists, Nikolai Shmelev and Vladimir Popov, they go on to state, no matter how much we wish to organise everything rationally, without waste, no matter how passionately we wish to lay all the bricks of the economic structure tightly, with no chinks in the mortar, it is not yet within our power. They were faced with the economic calculation problem, never mind the fact that they were setting down that of price floors that result in surplus waste problems. You don't hold the information of profits and losses, you're going to be faced with that problem with regards to waste. No, but that's right, it's just all limited creativity for those who support capitalism. Even though we've got recorded history there to show for itself, but it's just limited creativity.
Chapter 1. What is the ECP? Now, the ECP really refers to two separate so-called problems, the knowledge problem and the economic calculation problem proper.
Yes, the knowledge problem is something that socialism is faced with, but it is a completely separate issue to that of the economic calculation problem. It's not the same thing.
I personally see little point in separating the two, as the solutions to both are intertwined, but I want to give you all the facts.
The whole knowledge problem would be something of how you go into producing things, such as, Murray Rothbard goes into touching upon how you make a sandwich. Well, it's all well thinking you just slap two bits of bread and put something between it and you butter it, but how was the butter made? How was the bread made? All the process, the agricultural process, how was the machines that, are on the farms? How were the tractors made? How were all the, harvesters made? How were all the things made that go into collecting the grain, etc.? All the technical knowledge of what goes into, producing these type of things. But it's a different argument from the economic calculation problem. The economic calculation problem is basically a resource misallocation problem. Profits are important because it basically tells you the information of what the best methodology is into producing things, the most efficient methodology. That's the importance of profits.
The basic overview is given by von Mises and built upon further by Hayek. The argument goes as follows. Rational economic decision-making is not possible without price signals provided by genuinely competitive markets based on private ownership of the means of production and investment on the basis of profit maximization. Note the word rational. Now, the smart ones amongst you almost immediately see that this is a statement on platitudes and assumptions, not reality.
You can hear from his arrogance there, again, the narcissistic personality disorder, the nonsense where he's claiming, oh well, the smart ones among us. Well, if he was that smart, he would understand that profits and losses and the information of prices is driven by consumers' demand. That's why in the market, prices fluctuate. In Thomas Sowell's argument, and I gave this argument in the extended argument on the economic calculation problem, illustrated from Thomas Sowell's example of milk production and how milk is used into producing things like cheese, yogurt, butter, etc, etc. And not all cheese is the same because you've got all the different types of cheese, just like not all butter is the same. With all the hundreds and hundreds of different options available out there in the market, how do you know how much to produce of each and every single one of them? Well, the only reason for why prices is telling you that information is because prices fluctuate. We know that from time to time, as consumer demand isn't fixed. Consumer demand fluctuates and changes over time. It's just like how you change from summer clothing in demand, and it changes as you go into the winter period, because you're not going to want summer clothing during a winter period, are you? And it's obviously going to be different between that of Florida to that of New York. Consumer demand changes persistently. So in order for you to know, out of the hundreds of different options of different kinds of cheese, the different kinds of, ice cream, the different types of, butter, etc., and yogurt, you're going to have to know how much to produce of each and every single kind. So if you're going to take the resource of milk and allocate that milk resource into producing, say, yogurt or ice cream or whatever it is, you're going to have to know how much of it to use and at what specific time. For example, yogurt might be in greater demand at one point of the year over that of ice cream or whatever. For whatever reason being, only the consumer can tell you that information. How does consumers tell you that information? Because when consumer demand drives up, the price drives up. Now, there's the issue, because they want to just get rid of prices. Once the information of prices is just completely gone, how then do you know where you're allocating the milk? Well, you don't. You don't know what is in greater demand over what, because you're not leaving it down to the consumer. It's all well someone saying, well, you just stand around there in a shop and somehow you just watch them 24/7. When you talk about economic central planning, the central planner has to, centrally plan for an entire economy out of millions of different prices. They can't afford to just stand around and watch one shop all day, can they? Of course, they just think it's just as simple as just getting rid of prices. That was the reason why I illustrated about that of milk and the allocation of production into things like cheese, yogurt, butter. You're going to need to know how much of the milk you're going to allocate into production. You can't afford to just to take milk and allocate it into producing things that the market is not in demand of. That's the economic calculation problem, because socialists persistently just take a resource and allocate it into producing things that the market is not in demand of, and what happens? It ends up going to waste.
In fact, it's a statement so endowed with ideology as to make Zizek blush.
In Thomas Sowell's book Basic Economics, touching upon what Nikolai Shmelev and Vladimir Popov touch upon, which of course they are the two Soviet Union economists, they go on to state, state purchases increased and now all the distribution centres are filled with these pelts. Industry is unable to use them all and they often rot in warehouses before they can be processed. The Ministry of Light Industry has already requested Gazprom twice to lower purchasing prices, but the question has not been decided yet. And this is not surprising, its members are too busy to decide, have no time besides setting prices on these pelts. They have to keep track of another 24 million prices. That's right, folk. It's endowed with ideology, basically telling you as a result of socialist price controls distorting the information of profits and losses, it resulted in the waste of, the moleskin pelts left to rot in warehouses. But yeah, ideology. There's your typical socialist for you. A pathological liar.
All the basic assumptions are provably wrong, and that'll be shown soon.
So some wee bedwetter is sitting, having a wee chug over Marxism, and he wants to sit there and tell you that somehow we're wrong. Yeah, that's right. Two Soviet Union economists who actually had that in practice. Apparently they were just wrong. Yeah, and you're right. The narcissism.
The question basically goes, how could planners, be they all of society democratically contributing to a collective plan?
Rubbish. That is not economic central planning, and that has never been economic central planning. Never in recorded history. Central planning had absolutely nothing to do with the people having so-called democracy. The democracy to basically decide what gets produced. Rubbish. It's the central planner who gets to dictate what gets produced.
Decide how to coordinate production. What to produce, how much, at what stage, with which raw materials, how many raw materials, at the most efficient level, etc., etc. All this information needs to be gathered, calculated, parsed, and redistributed to the relevant centers of allocation and production at all levels of the economy.
Can you hear his contradiction there through when he's speaking about the central planning and then he says all of it needs to be calculated? How can you calculate if you've just taken away the information of profits and losses? You can't rationally calculate because you've just essentially taken away the information of profits and losses that can only be determined through the consumer. The only reason why you know that you should allocate more milk as a resource, which is scarce, into producing more ice cream at that specific given time in the market is because the price drives up. Not just a case of guessing. It's not just a case of just taking, oh, we'll just take this amount of milk and we'll put it into each one of them and that's how it'll just go, you know?
Mises' answer is a boring one. It isn't possible for them to do so, hence the market remains.
Ludwig von Mises' argument was actually a lot more detailed than that. Of course, he's taking Ludwig von Mises out of context. He's trying to make Ludwig von Mises sound as if he was stupid. If he was that bloody well stupid, then how the hell has he got the NHS in recorded history to bloody well show for it? How the hell has he got every single socialist regime to bloody well show for the economic calculation problem? It is beyond belief, folk. The narcissism that these people suffer from is unreal.
A side note being that this doesn't argue against socialism per se, but more against planning.
As I've pointed out, what defines socialism is economic central planning, because they believe that the market cannot regulate itself. So they try to control the market, they try to control the economy, and through that you're basically centrally planning. For example, to oppose the market regulating itself is to oppose price fluctuation, is to oppose consumers determining what prices are. That's capitalism, by the way. Socialism is the opposite. Socialism means you're taking in planning and centrally planning what the prices are. That's essentially what it is.
Chapter 1.5. Why even bother discussing this? In my opinion, the discussion of the problem is pointless because the vast majority of the people that bring up the ECP line aren't trained economists or even knowledgeable in the field, but a bunch of people who've learned a catchphrase they think is heavier than it really is.
So what on earth is he talking about, that you have to be an economist in order to understand the economic calculation problem? That's just sheer and utter shite, folk. Basically, if you were to read Thomas Sowell's book, Basic Economics, and he even touches upon it within the first section on that to do with prices, just read his section on prices, or maybe if you don't want to invest in the book, then of course look at something online, maybe on YouTube, and you'll find the audio piece, and just listen through it, and he explains it. It's not a case that we parrot basically what these economists are saying. We understand what the economists are saying. They actually give a reasonable argument for the economic calculation problem that makes it common sense.
Anyone even moderately knowledgeable about what they're talking about would know that this really isn't as damning of a critique as it's made out to be in some places. This doesn't mean the discussion shouldn't take place, though. You should just be a little strategic with the way you go about it. Point out the ignorance in a calm and cordial way, and don't give in to the flawed presuppositions of the argument.
And that, of course, folk, is what you call narcissism, because just like what was pointed out by Thomas Sowell on the two Soviet Union economists, that of, Nikolai Shmelev and Vladimir Popov, of course it contradicts the entire narrative. We've got real-world examples. But of course, he wants to call you ignorant.
For one, we'd have to agree on what rational economic management is. Cut through the propaganda and you'll see that to them, rational only seems to mean what serves the desires of investors and shareholders.
The stupidity of that comment is extreme, and this is proof that he's an economic illiterate degenerate, because the only way that an investor is going to invest in the first place is if something's going to be profitable. Therefore, in order for something to be profitable, it has to be something that consumers are in demand of in the first place. What profits are, profits is the information of consumers' demand. In order to serve for the people of society, you have to know the information of profits. And the only way an investor is going to make an investment is if something is profitable. Why the hell would an investor take a risk in investing in something that's going to be loss-making? There's no incentive for them to do so. Of course, there is risks involved when it comes to investment. There is the potential they could potentially face the loss, and I'm not saying that investors do not make losses, but that's not their incentive. That's not what they are aiming for. What an investor is aiming for is to make an investment in something that is going to be profitable. And in order for something to be profitable, it has to be, in demand from the consumer. When he speaks about that to do with the investors, as if to say, oh, it only serves the interests of the investor, what's he talking about? He's trying to separate the people of society, the consumers, from that of the investors, as if to say there's no direct correlation with the relation of the two of them. That honestly shows you how ignorant these people are of fundamental basic economics, and he sat there with his narcissism and called you ignorant.
To socialists, rational implies meeting needs regardless of profitability.
Rational is something that's not irrational. Rational is something reasonable. How the hell is it reasonable to oppose profits, which is basically the information driven from consumers' demand, and then claim that you're somehow rational at the same time? Profits is information gathered from consumers' demand. That's telling you the information what consumers are spending most on. Therefore, it's telling you what to produce more of. It's telling you what resources to use more of based on consumers' demand, and where to allocate the resources, what to invest more in, how much to produce, and how the resources are transported. And above all else, it tells you what the most efficient method of production is. I'm just going to say it. Whenever these stupid people say that they oppose profits, right, and they say, oh, it's profits over people, as if to say that's a bad thing, they don't understand that profits is the information of consumers' demand. If you oppose the profits, you oppose the consumer. That's the reason why these people are beyond ignorant folk. They're extremely ignorant. They're so frustratingly ignorant. You can tell they've never studied basic economics. You fucking know it for a fact they've never studied it. How the hell can you sit there and call yourself rational by saying that you want to serve for the needs and wants of people, but then say that you oppose profits? You know, it's a contradiction.
Secondly, we're operating on two different definitions of efficiency. To the pro-market side, they mean profit maximization.
Efficiency with regards to economics means that you're maximizing productivity whilst using the fewest resources as possible. That's what efficiency means. You're going to, maximize your profits, but how do you maximize your profits? By minimizing your costs. And how do you minimize your costs? By using fewer resources. That is the definition of efficiency. It's not just a case of just splitting it in two and then creating something completely out of thin air. That is the definition of efficiency.
They try to dress it up in all sorts of rosy language, but in the end it all boils down to what makes the most money regardless of utility, as they rely on the flawed assumption that whatever is profitable is useful, / increases general well-being, / improves society, / meets a need, and so on.
So the first thing is that with regards to profits is only something that you're going to make by providing a service that consumers want. After all, that's what profits are. Profits is the goods that are selling. The second thing is the fact that through profits, businesses are going to look at the most efficient methods of production. Try and maximize their profits by minimizing their costs. That means using fewer resources. And in relation to that, they're going to have to look at their reputation. If you're trying to reap greater profits, you're going to have to try and serve for the consumer, and therefore your reputation as a business is vitally important. It's not just a case of just running a business and then producing whatever hell you like and throwing it out there in the market, because if you damage that, it's going to come at a far greater cost on you, especially if your industry is dangerous, especially if your business is known to have a dangerous reputation. Because in order for you to entice future employees, you're going to have to, of course, pay out a wage premium, so of course you're paying out far higher wages. He doesn't look at business reputation. Again, he just thinks it's a case that a business can just ignore their reputation, do whatever the hell they like, and somehow they just gain, profits by just producing whatever the hell they like and doing whatever the hell they like. He doesn't acknowledge the relationship that the consumer's needs and wants is what determines what profits are, and therefore businesses gaining greater profits is telling you that they're doing something right for the consumer.
Even with that said, only the smart ones will get far enough to admit this.
Again, the narcissism, folk. Only the smart ones will know this. How the hell does he claim to be smart when he doesn't even understand where profits come from, and he doesn't even understand how businesses gain profits? You're not going to profit by producing something that the consumer is not in demand of.
To socialists, on the other hand, efficiency is measured according to need first. How many calories? How many housing units? How many roads or hospitals or schools, etc.?
Then that isn't smart, because the only way that you're going to know the information of how much to produce or what, individual consumer demand is through the information of prices And that can only be determined through fluctuating prices determined by the consumers. Not all housing is the same, just like not all ice cream is the same, just like not all butter is the same, just like not all cheese is the same, just like not all food is the same. You can't just say food is just one. That isn't the case, and that isn't the reality. You've got people who have nut allergies and all sorts, and people who are lactose intolerant. I mean, it's just like saying that, you know, everybody likes the same clothing. Well, that isn't the case, because I utterly despise bell-bottom denims, and that's just reality. Nobody likes the same stuff. In order for you to understand the needs and wants of individual consumers, you're going to have to be able to serve for them. And how do you do that if you've destroyed the information of profits and losses? Calling yourself smart, but you really aren't. It's impossible for you to centrally plan for a society of 65 million people who all want different things. How then do you know how much to produce of each and every single option possible available? It's not just like saying clothing is just one thing. What about all the variety of different styles? What about all the variety of different colours? What about all the variety of different materials? And that's exactly what I mean about narcissism, folk. He's basically calling himself something that he really isn't.
Furthermore, the entire argument, and Mises' conception in particular, hinges on a world of horse-drawn carriages and a lack of instant communications. His arguments fall apart when we take into account satellites, the internet, and modern computing.
How the hell does the internet disprove that of Ludwig von Mises' argument? If anything, it actually solidifies his argument, because prior to the World Wide Web, what you had was the intranet, and it was inefficient. Yes, the government invented that to do with the intranet, but it was not efficient. I can even provide you this article by the Mises Institute that covers this, and as a result of the absence of profits and losses, this is the very reason why it was inefficient. Yet as soon as it was put to the market, and the market provided what was known as the World Wide Web, it made it efficient.
By the 1940s, the theoretical responses to Mises, Hayek and co. in relation to the ECP solved this non-issue, especially in relation to consumer goods. By the 50s, Kantorovich proved that you can carry out rational economic planning and optimize production without money. Lange, Davidson, Cockshott, and dozens more have further contributed to this very long and very tired discussion at this point.
Socialism has absolutely nothing, not a single thing to do with consumers driving production. Nothing. Socialism is central planning. Socialism is the opposite of the market economy. Socialism is economic central planning. How the hell does any computer technology know the information of consumers' needs and wants with no money? If there's no money, there's no prices. If there's no prices, there's no information from the consumer. Now you could start talking about that of things like that of surveillance, of like what you see through things like Facebook, etc. But even that doesn't even touch or scratch the surface. Now you haven't made an argument. You haven't, even stated why Kantorovich has a rational argument. He hasn't solved the economic calculation problem, and the likes of the Soviet Union contradicts them. I even had William Paul Cockshott laughably tell me that the whole thing to do with the waste produced in the Soviet Union, the quote that I gave earlier on, he tried to say that wasn't the economic calculation problem. So what does that tell you? It tells you that not even William Paul Cockshott understands the economic calculation problem. That's an embarrassment. Oh, and to think that he went through Glasgow University and that he was a professor at the Glasgow University bloody well proves my point that I wouldn't trust universities for as far as I could fucking throw a stick.
The failures of the market. To the disappointment of the people who invoke the ECP, markets, prices, and everything else related in the real world don't exactly work how the argument presupposes. The economist Robin Hanel argued that markets are actually systematically inefficient because externalities are pervasive and because real-world markets are rarely truly competitive or in equilibrium.
Now, of course, that's rather quite debatable. The whole thing on the negative externalities I've covered before, but when he speaks about this anti-competitive market today, type of markets you see, that's because of corporatism. That's because of anti-capitalism.
For all this discussion of supply and demand, ideal and rational prices, self-regulation, etc., important realities are sidestepped.
Yeah, self-regulation, that's if the market was self-regulating. It's just like the compulsive liars who tried to claim that the banking crisis occurred because of so-called unregulated markets, despite the fact that the banks were over-regulated in the United States and Great Britain going into 2008.
Like, for example, manipulation of supply through arbitrary pricing or market and supply manipulation.
Now this goes down to the argument on supply, and as if to say that businesses can just get away with, restricting productive output and therefore they can manipulate price, etc., and shaft the consumer and whatnot. That is anti-capitalist, and the market would never allow that within a capitalist system. So there's a prime example of exactly what we're speaking about. These people just, claim that this is somehow the fault of capitalism, when really it's government's intervention that's enabled this problem to occur, where it allows businesses, as a result of government's intervention and strangling the market, strangling the private sector, it's allowed businesses to get away with restricting productive output and getting away with shafting the consumer, etc., etc. Of course, government's intervention has manipulated that very problem.
Hoarding, lobbying, or manipulation of demand.
Lobbying, which is essentially anti-capitalist. Political entrepreneurs are seeking special interest favours, looking to use socialism to gain leverage over the market to beat out their competition. So in order to get to the position of where they want, they need to use socialism.
Or through collusion, or one-sided buyouts, or planned obsolescence.
Now, that cannot form in a free market, and the reason why it cannot form and last in a free market is because whenever a cartel tries to form in a free market, there's no barrier to entry into the market. And because they drive their prices up, then of course that industry is very, very much profitable. It entices competition to step in. They have the incentive not only to beat out the cartel, because the industry itself is very much profitable, then they step in. And the more the supply of competition steps in, the less profitable the industry becomes. And that is exactly what happened in the 1860s with that of the oil refinery market. That's the reason why the price of a barrel of oil dropped by 50% between the early 1860s right up to 1870. And the reason for that is because more and more competition jumped into the industry. It was a very, very profitable industry, the oil refinery market, because more and more competition stepped in. There's greater quantity of production, there's greater quantity of output. A cartel can never last in a free market because there's the freedom for businesses to just step in and eliminate them. They don't have a government there preventing them from entering the market. So in order for a collusion to take place, it's through that of government's intervention. And you saw that with the private pharmaceutical companies. So it's through socialism that creates the problem, not capitalism.
The simple matter of the fact is, these idealized, uniformly competitive markets found in textbooks don't exist in reality. Real markets don't conform to those models.
The reason this is a nonsensical argument, folk, is because you can look at the periods of history and okay, there was government intervention, etc. There's no denying that fact. But you can compare where the market was left be to regulate itself and then compare that to what happened with the intervention. What you can see from the periods when the market was left be to regulate itself, whether it was on interest rates, etc., the market worked perfectly fine. Now, in each instance where you saw the intervention through the use of socialism, you saw problems created. It's just like how when they tried to fix the ratio of money, it created a problem where it wiped gold out of the market, made silver the dominant standard, and it did the exact same thing when they tried to do the same thing in 1834. Had that been left be to the market, that problem would never have occurred. He's trying to use this argument to say, oh well, this is the fault of capitalism. How is it? It's intervention in the market. That's not a fault of the market. That's a fault of intervention in the market. When the market was left be, it was working fine, but as soon as you intervene, the problem occurs. Therefore, what we're saying is, maybe we should just get rid of the intervention. Oh no, they don't want to do that, because it changes the entire narrative. This is what creates the problem. Here's the solution. The solution is, don't touch the market. Don't touch the interest rates. But oh no, he doesn't go down that road. He just says, oh look, there's intervention and this is just the natural state of things. But that's just a black and white picture of history. It's a black and white picture of everything. It doesn't even bother to acknowledge what caused the problems. The reason why he doesn't is because it changes the narrative of all the pish that he's spouting. And I can tell you this, folk, all that fixing of interest rates, etc., and all the socialist subsidies, none of that's to do with capitalism, and that's why he doesn't.
Are limited and manipulated both internally and externally, and are at a stage of capitalist development in which truly free and fully competitive markets are not only impossible, but also highly undesirable to capitalists and their lackeys.
What a complete and utter load of shite, folk. Hong Kong itself, between 1948 to 1997, was a strongly free market-based economy. It had extremely low levels of government regulation. To sit there and say that free markets are impossible is just the biggest load of shite that any socialist could spread to you. Their argument to say, oh, it wasn't a free market because the government owned the housing, as if that's a fucking argument to say that the market isn't free itself. I mean, this is how myopic their worldview of things are, right? Their worldview of everything in economics and just politics and just history, it's all black and white. They don't understand that the word free is scalable. So therefore, it's a question of how free your market economy is, right? And they were actually the most successful and most efficient economies the world has ever seen. But trust a socialist to stare blindly straight past recorded history and try to tell you that it's impossible and then say that it's, you know, something that just wouldn't work.
With that said, though, let's start simply. Supposedly, the market is the most efficient mechanism for the allocation of resources. If that really is the case, though, why have they done such a shit job of it all?
Because you socialists won't leave the market be. That's the problem. You fucking idiot. Because socialists like you won't leave the market be. That's the problem. We've already seen from history, which history's been crystal clear. Every single time you socialists have tried to control and manipulate the market, whether it was trying to control the ratio of money, whether it was trying to control and manipulate the interest rates, whether it was, you know, through all your socialist government subsidies, you are the one responsible for the inefficiency that led to so many hundreds of private companies going bankrupt as a result of it. We've got the clear recorded history to show for that. To sit there and say, if the market's not efficient enough, then how come there's all these problems? Well, it's because of all your fucking socialism intervening in the market. That's what we're telling you.
Boom and bust cycles, the associated severe recessions that drown countless millions into poverty.
What on earth has that of the boom and bust cycle got to do with that of capitalism? Capitalism is in relation to do with free market money. That means money determined by the market. And capitalism is all about the market regulating itself. We've told you this over and over and over. Therefore, capitalism is about the market value. Now, capitalism, in terms of our money, free market money, was gold and silver. And when you talk about capitalism relative to the ratio or interest rates, it's talking about leaving the ratio and interest rates down to the free market, down to the laws of supply and demand. It's not about your socialist government interventionism through trying to control and manipulate the ratio that ended up wiping silver and gold out of the market for periods in history. And it most certainly is not about controlling and manipulating interest rates. Now, in the 19th century, what caused the boom and bust cycle was your socialist attempt to try and go against the market, which was gold and silver. And you started running the printing press that caused the panic of 1819. And it's exactly what led to other panics throughout the 19th century. In other words, going against the market. How the hell can you say that it's the fault of capitalism by going against the market? To go against the market is anti-capitalism. Into the 20th century, through the socialist fixing of the interest rates, where you artificially fixed them below market value, you created the boom and bust cycle because that would eventually create the boom and then the eventual bust because there's a shortage of resources and a shortage of savings. You don't understand any of that because, let's face it, you're an economic illiterate degenerate.
Destroying whole economies in the process. All of this happens due to mismatches between required inputs and produced outputs. I thought prices and market mechanisms were supposed to prevent such gross mismatches.
Maybe if you stop fixing the ratio, maybe if you just leave interest rates be to the free market, maybe then we'll actually solve problems. And maybe, just maybe, if we return to free market money and you stop trying to control it, maybe then we'll actually have an economy that can regulate itself efficiently and we wouldn't have all the boom and bust cycle. Oh, but that's right. Try and project that off onto capitalism because that's essentially what you are. A narcissist.
If the market remains so efficient, why is it that when these disastrous failures happen, capitalism isn't saved by market mechanisms, but by government bailouts and pump priming?
You're having a laugh. It was your pump priming that caused the fucking crisis. That's the reason the crisis occurred. Pump priming involves the artificially fixing lower of the interest rates. That's what created the boom and bust cycle. You're encouraging increased consumer spending in a period of a crisis. Artificially lowered the interest rates. Therefore, that's creating an increase of consumer demand during a period when there's a shortage of savings and a shortage of resources. That's what the higher price signal of the interest rate is telling you. So if you try to artificially lower the interest rate, the underlying reality of the fucking shortage goes nowhere. Learn basic economics. It's called picking up a fucking book and learning. Not called being an ignoramus and spouting a load of left-wing fucking pish.
Legitimately, if the market was really as great as it's painted out to be, why is it that practically all of developed capitalism has been crawling along economic stagnation since the Great Recession?
Because you're not living under a capitalist system. You're living under an economy where it's been progressive government intervention in the fucking market. Your private sector's overregulated. We can even look at this here. This is your financial regulation, son. Welcome to economic reality. You've created the problem. It's not the fault of capitalism. You intervened in the market and created the fucking problem and then projected the blame off onto capitalism. That's the fucking problem.
Growth of inequalities unparalleled, stagnant wages, the crumbling of infrastructure, hell, even climate change.
Okay, climate change is just a load of nonsense. The second thing on stagnant wages is just another myth. Of course, this is just typical of you socialists. It's just like the claim that you make on that of the dangerous concentration of wealth in the hands of the few. You just talk utter pish, son. That's all you do. This was under Ronald Reagan, and the rich grew richer, but the poor grew richer faster relative to wages. Oh dear. What was all that about Reaganomics and, stuff about how evil Margaret Thatcher was? It's all evil Margaret Thatcher's fault. She created the fucking crisis.
How's it that the all-knowing and all-efficient market hasn't solved any of these issues, and practically everything that benefits the general populace over the profits of a few are so dependent on state financing and public sector efforts? But government meddling! Blah blah, it's the same tired argument over and over.
Ah, so you do acknowledge that it was government meddling and you just try to brush it aside. Well, isn't that a bloody well surprise now, isn't it? Of course you would completely ignore that. And the reason why you completely ignore the fact that it was government meddling is because that was the fucking problem. It's all the fault of your socialism. Fucking common sense, son.
Markets are anything but rational at allocating resources, if we're being honest. And the claim of price signals being the shining star that guides the Magi to Bethlehem is equally, well, let's just say, putting too much faith in the idea. Price signals are good at indicating where profit can be made, so that industry is mobilized. But profitability, if we're being generous, is only tangentially linked to society's well-being. They can claim all they like that the only way to profit is to solve the needs or wants of the consumer, but that is demonstrably not true.
That is true, because that's what profits are. Profits is the information driven from consumer demand, so I don't know where you're getting that information from, and it just proves that you don't even understand what profits are.
Firstly, this depends on you being a consumer in the first place. I mean, you have to spend money to even get a look from this benevolent system.
See how simple-minded a socialist is, where they just think business people are somehow just completely separate from that of consumers. They don't understand that business people themselves are also consumers. Businesses buy from other businesses. Of course, that's the myopic worldview of a Marxist.
Even with that said, there are many ways to profit while neglecting or harming consumers at all levels. People starving in the wealthiest country on earth is an example of this.
Again, this is just a case where it's all projectionism. It's the fault of their socialism that's created their problems.
Homeless people next to people's homes. Do I need to yet again, for example, mention climate change?
What on earth is a poor person or a homeless person sitting outside a rich person's home? What on earth has the rich person got to do with that? That's not the fault of the rich person. You're making a baseless assumption. It's like saying you're poor because rich people are rich. Rich people don't make you poor. And I'm not saying that today's system isn't problematic with regards to opportunity, because we do believe in freedom of opportunity. You're basically trying to claim that the reason for why poor people are poor is because rich people are rich.
Where rather than mobilizing to reduce carbon emissions and improve our collective situation, companies would rather bribe and lie their way out of regulations and limitations on their businesses.
No, they don't, folk, because that's not corporatism. Corporatism is whereby the big corporations are lobbying government for more government regulations to stamp out the competition of smaller businesses. So they don't lobby for less regulation, they lobby for more. That's what led to the corporatist system. That's what enabled them to gain the monopolies and the oligopolies over the market, through more government regulation, not less. That's the end of the first section. Of course, I'm going to get around to responding on the rest because his video is quite lengthy and I thought that I would break this down. So if you've got any questions that you would like to ask from what I've already covered, then be free to comment in the comment section below. Of course, be sure to like the video, share the video, and I shall be sure to get back to you. And of course, thank you for watching. Cheers.